Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me on Textile Talk podcast. I'm Gail Cowley and I'll be your host for this episode. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Murron Fraser, who is a contemporary textile artist. Just to give you a little bit of background before we start our chat, Murron delves into the connection between nature, folklore and storytelling. Inspired by the hidden depths of the natural world and the narratives within it, she creates intuitive textile artworks that seamlessly blend nature and narrative into visual storytelling. Her practice is grounded in curiosity and observation, aiming to ignite a spark of connection, glimmers and wonder in the viewer. Murron explores a diverse range of textile techniques, including machine embroidery, printmaking, and hand-applied processes. Colour, texture, and symbolism are central to her style. As a qualified teacher, Murron is passionate about sharing her skills and empowering others to discover their creativity. She actively delivers community arts projects and offers her own artist-led workshops and creative experiences. Before we dive into the conversation, a quick thank you to the School of Stitch Textiles for supporting this podcast. They are the UK's leading provider of City and Guilds accredited home study courses in textiles. From beginners through to advanced to master practitioner programmes, you can study flexibly from home with expert tutor support. Visit sofst.org to find out more. Hi Murron, and thank you so much for agreeing to be my guest on the podcast today. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to Textile Talk.
Oh, hello. Thank you so much, Gail. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here and to chat to you today as well.
Oh, lovely. So I wonder if I could start off by asking you to tell us a little bit about your creative journey and really just how textiles became your focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for me, it's been quite a long journey. I don't think naturally straight away I realised that textiles was for me. This went right back to when I was at college and I did a foundation course, and that was amazing because it gave me a real insight to so many different techniques and processes, and it just gave me permission to play, which is one of the favourite things when I think back of all the things I've done. That's one of the most favourite things I've ever done because it was just pure experimentation and trying things out. And I think it was at that point really when I was developing my knowledge and my skills that I started to identify areas that naturally I was drawn to. So naturally within my work, very textural, I like to capture lots of different elements, this collagey texture within my pieces. And that is both within kind of applied textiles, but also within my sketchbook, within the way I draw, in the way I even record a mood board. I was noticing that this is kind of my approach. And I always remember getting to the end of the foundation and we had to kind of choose an area that we were going to focus on. And I just didn't know what to do. And I always remember chatting to my tutor and saying, I really like these elements about my work. I've started to notice that this is what I'm drawn to. And it was at that point they said, well, what about textiles? And it just never had come into my mind because I think at that point I saw textiles as kind of like the classic dressmaking and, that way around things. And I didn't really consider it as much as an art form that it was. It was just something that I knew a little bit about, but not enough to kind of think, oh, actually, this could be something I could do. And I think at that point, that's where this light bulb kind of went off in my head. And I started to use things like the sewing machine and textile processes and all these different elements that form the art form, which is textiles, to create artwork rather than what traditionally it's used for. And I think at that point it really sparked something for me. So I remember I had to choose again. There's lots of choices in these things. What I wanted to do at university, and I put my name down for so many graphic design courses because at that point I was doing graphics as well, and I really loved the same thing again, the layering, how you could kind of apply lots of elements, of textural qualities that I was using within the digital side of stuff as well. And it was only till I actually went to a fair where lots of universities were, they could like chat to people. I just saw it. I just saw this stand and there was just wallpapers and beautiful illustrations and they were printed onto textiles and there was also embroidery and all these elements. And I thought, wow, like that's me. And I don't think really until I actually physically saw it even more and then like a professional setting as well, I didn't realise how much you could actually push it and how you could actually use it in so many different ways. Because really textiles is a huge umbrella term for so many different elements and disciplines and, you know, techniques. And I think for me, that's where it really, you know, that light bulb went off and my textile journey really began, to be honest.
And I noticed right at the beginning of that, you mentioned having permission to play.
Yes.
And that, I think that's a really important thing, isn't it? For all of us, just time to experiment and time to see how different techniques and different materials can be used.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think even today, like from that moment and right now into my professional career as a textile artist, it's something I'm still very passionate about, not only within my own textile artwork, but something that I actually do within the workshops that I deliver. So I'm all about helping women especially push their imaginations and be expressive and like playfully creative as well. Because I truly believe that everybody has this part of them within them. Everyone has some sort of creativity. I think it's just finding the key to that Pandora's box to open and this whole new part of yourself can be explored. So it goes on quite a deeper level, but I think having that permission to play as well, I think as adults, we don't really get that opportunity very much. And, you know, through being creative, you can actually push so many boundaries and limits and just ask them questions. What if I do this? What if I do that? And it's just endless. So I think
Yeah.
having someone just give you that permission actually just starts the ball rolling. And within that, it can unravel so many lovely things as well.
Oh, it can, yeah. I mean, do you find when you have people on workshops that they're very open to that? Or do you sometimes get that, well, it's just not me, I'm not creative sort of response?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's a bit of both. I think a lot of the time people come and they tend to say to me, "Well, I've never done art since I was at school, or it's something I've only done a little bit of, but I've not really like known how to do it." And I think they come with a lot of hesitation sometimes, thinking, "Well, can I do this? I'm good enough to
Mm.
do." Or maybe they have done it before, but they don't feel confident enough. I see this a lot in people. And with my workshops, especially, like I want people to come along and feel like they can just explore and have fun with it. There's no real right or wrong. They do cover technique and they do cover ways of creating things, but actually the point of it, at the core of the workshop, is about you making it your own and you taking the project in on it on your own and seeing what you can create at the end. So they're not very prescriptive in that way. And I think through having that actually allows people to slow down, relax, and you know, there's that community element as well with chatting to other people who are like-minded. And I think slowly this sort of creative playing aspect, because I've given people that permission and I'm encouraging that out of people, their imaginations start to sort of switch on. And you can kind of see that when people lean into it, it's just the mood completely changes and people are getting really excited about what they're doing and they get really engrossed in what they're doing. And it's amazing to watch. And it's something like I'm really passionate about as well, because I think from a health point of view, you know, there's a lot of research into creative health and how that can be so beneficial to our brains. So things like the flow state where you feel challenged but not enough to make you feel anxious. And in that real middle point is where the magic lies really, and how it can have such a positive impact on the health of your brain as well. So it actually stems quite deep, you know, and
Yes.
but really I'm not coming in saying, oh, I do workshops to make your brain better, but actually just through the act of being with other people and being creative can have them health benefits as well. And I think with the type of work that I do, you know, looking at folklore and hidden worlds and nature, the whole point of it is to kind of inspire people people and give people that new perspective on the world around us. Because I think as kids, kids' imaginations are wild, aren't they? They've got so many ideas because they're allowed to play and they're allowed to have these wonderful imaginations. But as adults, we kind of lose that a bit. And I think sometimes you just stop noticing. So I think the point of my work and also the workshops is to get people to slow down and kind of consider new perspectives of the world around us and use that to inspire their own imaginations and let them go wild.
I think that when I say some of the students that we have, that are doing City and Guilds courses, and they never look at things quite the same again. On the course, you have to notice what's around you. You have to think about where you get your designs from and how you might develop them. And I think that just leads into a mindset that you never quite end, really. You're always looking around you thinking, oh, isn't that, that sunset's fabulous. I'd like to be able to do that in fabric or whatever.
I know.
So I wonder, was there sort of a particular moment when you realised that this was going to become a serious part of your life?
Yeah, I think really, I've since been very young, I've always been really creative. I've always had an interest for it. I was always drawing or making things or doing stuff that had that creative flair within it. It just was my love. And I think taking that into education and building on that gave me the skill set and deepened that creative flair and my passion for it. But I always remember there was a point when I was at university, actually, and we were given the opportunity to collaborate with a museum and go into the archives and explore them. And it was a live brief, so we got to design a product range for a shop, for their museum shop. And also there was an opportunity to exhibit work. And I actually remember just feeling really excited by it because I thought, you learn all these skills, you practice your own creativity through doing sketchbook work or textiles or whatever it is that you do. But that's as far as it ever goes, where this felt like actually it's got a purpose to it. And I absolutely loved it. And it ended up me actually designing a product range, and it was selected for the shop, and I got to exhibit my work in this national exhibition at the museum. And it was just that point where I thought, actually, I can do this. People like what I've made. I've enjoyed the process, and it just gave me a taste of actually, like you've mentioned, this could be an actual career for me to take forward. And I think from there, something sort of changed, and I kept developing my work in a way that I thought this could be like a career path. And I think what I struggled with a little bit is deciding on which part of it. Because like I mentioned at the start, textiles is such a huge industry. I don't think people really realise how much comes under that umbrella. It can be from designing car interior to wallpaper to textile artwork to fashion. I mean, it's huge. And I think sometimes it just gets branded with the kind of traditional textiles that most people relate to. So I think for me, when I knew more and I got more awareness and understanding of the subject matter and the career paths I could take, it was a bit overwhelming because I wasn't sure where I sat the best. And I think developing my work allowed me to get a better understanding of that. And I think doing the museum project identified to me that that was the kind of route I wanted to take, perhaps working in heritage, which I went on to do, and being a designer maker and thinking about how my own creative work could be applied in different ways. And all along as well, I've been very passionate about sharing my skills with people and education. So before I even went to university, I used to volunteer and do a lot of community work and things like that just to gain experience. And I don't think that ever went away as well. So it sort of started to form that my career path was going to be a portfolio career. And again, that was something I didn't even know that you could do. So I think as you develop and as you learn more about things, you actually discover that within a creative industry especially, there's no A to B. It isn't like a traditional career path. And sometimes that's quite difficult because you think, oh, well, shouldn't I be doing this next or this next? But actually, it's a whole realm of its own. And it is so versatile and wonderful that you can really spread your wings and try lots of different things.
Yeah, those are really different things, aren't they? In that, you have a project brief to design something for a shop, which is going to be quite, I suppose, quite prescriptive in its outcome.
Yes.
And then you've got sort of the things that you do perhaps for yourself, the things you enjoy doing, you know, the pieces that you have on your website and everything, which obviously aren't banded in that way. They don't have a prescribed out. And I wonder, is the one that you enjoy doing more than the other?
I think it is a bit 50-50, to be honest. Like, I love the creative freedom. I think when you are in that flow state where, you know, you're really absorbed by the work and you're having to come up with ideas, and I never really know what the piece will look like at the end. I'm very intuitive in the way that I approach stuff. So I describe my practice as rhizomatic, which, a bit like mushrooms, they all interconnect. The ideas and my approaches, there's no linear sort of streak that goes through my process. It can kind of interconnect with different elements, and it's always expanding. There's no real end point or start point to it. So in that way, I mean, that's huge, isn't it? It could go on forever, and I think that's a wonderful side of it. But then being an artist, I think, you know, it's not really spoken about as much, but you are a business at the end of the day. Like, to be able to be creative, you've got to try and make money in different places, and I think that then starts to put your creativity into a way that you have got your creative side where you can just experiment and have fun, but then how can that be fed into different things? So whether that is putting it onto items to sell, or is it workshops, or is it commissions, and the list goes on. So I think you do have to think a bit more in that way as well. Like, although the work's good enough in its own right, it's important that you have elements from it that can be more, basically can earn you money.
Commercial,
because
yeah.
Yeah, commercial, exactly, yeah. Because otherwise you can get lost in the work.
Yes, and I mean, it's not always easy, is it? Because textiles in general do tend to be very time consuming. So you've got that sort of tension between wanting to spend time on it and enjoying spending time, but then also thinking, well, am I going to be able to make some money out of this at the end of it? And I
Yeah.
know a lot of people do sort of get around that a little bit by maybe having pieces of their work photographed and perhaps, you know, using those photographs in cards or something like that.
Yeah.
I wonder how you've sort of tackled that, I suppose, tension between the two elements, the wanting to spend lots of time and, on the other hand, commercially not being able to.
Yeah, it is difficult. I mean, it's seen me do lots of different things, and I've been lucky really that, you know, through the different opportunities I've had, I've like, my creativity has had the chance to be kind of explored, and there's been that fun aspect of it, because it is fun creating, and I don't think, you know, you ever want to put a lid on that, because that's your creative practice at the end of the day. But I think obviously things have to have deadlines, and things have to be finished in certain amounts of time. So I always see it as a pause point, like a full stop in the story. It's never the end, it's just what was made in that moment of time. So, for example, like, some of the things when I first got into doing it properly, textiles, a lot of my work was put onto product ranges, because I could see how my own textile artwork and, you know, vision that I had within my work could be applied to things. So that looks like wallpapers. I was making like original pieces, fabrics as well that people could commission. And then it was more kind of the commercial side of things in terms of like cards, like you mentioned. I made some pouches. I also made like little pieces of art to sell, and brooches, and the list goes on really. I tried to apply all my designs in different ways. And I think at that point in time, I was working a lot in collections. So I think in the nature of working in collections does have that pause point, and it does make you stop at a certain point. It isn't endless. And all the way through this, I was teaching, so I'm a qualified teacher as well, and I used to teach in like formal education, also community arts, and I always kept that side of it going with, you know, selling my own work and everything. And then I managed to, it was like in lockdown of all times, get some commissions working with museums through kind of connecting through different projects, and also the community art side of things. And it allowed me to actually explore archives and create product ranges for their shop. And I think with museums especially, they have so much stuff that they can't have everything out on display. A lot of it is archival records. So it was just a really lovely project, and I really, because of the experience I'd had originally when that spark happened, and I thought, yeah, this could be a career for me when I worked on the live project at university. I think I took my learning from that and I applied it in the same way. But actually I found working on life briefs as an independent artist felt very different, obviously, to what they did in education. They felt more like my own, and I could put my stamp on it in my process of actually creating and getting that end point for the client. At the end of the day, it's a commission. I could make that a bit more my own, which felt really nice. So I did have a lot of creative autonomy within the project I was working on, and it allowed me to have that creative freedom, but it was to a brief. So I was working for somebody else's brief rather than letting my own, creative ideas and thoughts all come out. Even though it was my own, it was tailored for something. So I worked like that for quite a while. And I think it's only till I did my MA, I really sat down and thought about the different strands and what it was that made my practice. So when I look back at everything and all the work that I'd done, right, even back to like college times, I'd really picked out 3 key things. And one of them was nature. Like my work was very much inspired by nature. Storytelling had come through in different ways. So that had been a bit of the heritage. Archival work was kind of bringing these things back to life. But also I'd been inspired by storytelling in different projects that I'd done. So I always remember my grandparents had telegraphs from their wedding and I used them for a project. So even quite early on, I was doing these types of things. And then the third thing was like the heritage side of stuff. I loved the idea of the archival records and bringing this back to life and giving people this new perspective. So these 3 things I'd identified, I'd built throughout my creative practice over the years. And then I thought, how do I bring this all together to feel more true and authentic to myself? And funny enough, actually, my family have been doing a family tree, and a lot of it, my heritage comes from Celtic civilizations in Scotland and Ireland. And I looked at the folklore and the storytelling there, and I was really inspired by it. And I found how much that actually connected to nature as well. So them 2 elements like naturally joined together. And then through that, my work was almost like the storytelling part of it. I was bringing these 2 different ideas and these 2 elements that are told in stories like folklore stories, but making them like a visual story as well. And I think from there, that's then translated into workshops, taking my teaching experience and things like that and the community arts side of things. And it's all kind of naturally come together. And I don't think like that's something that I planned for. It's just how things have naturally developed over time. And it reminded me a lot of my process of even thinking of textiles was for me, just looking at the way that I actually created and the different elements I used to put together and how I applied stuff naturally fell into that textiles realm. So I think stuff is there naturally within you. And as you create and as you develop, it's just sometimes it takes a bit of time to actually show themselves and for you as an artist to recognise them. So sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent there, didn't I?
No, it's fine. I wonder, so during this evolving process, did you find yourself drawn particularly to certain techniques and certain materials?
I'd say so, yeah. So I'm very mixed media. I've always tried loads of different things. I like to tell people this within my workshops and when they do courses with me, but learn the technique, learn how to do it, and then just throw the rule book out the window and start asking what if I put that and that together. And I think that's something I've always done and just played. And is that going back to that creative play again? What if I do this and what if I do that, and the experimentation side of it all. So I think I already had a lot of that with me, but when I've come to develop my work further, especially using textile techniques, one of the main ones I'm drawn to is machine embroidery. I kind of forget that it's a sewing machine and imagine it as a pen and a tool to draw with. And I think because it is that continuous line, you have to kind of be quite intuitive in the way that you draw in. You could stop and start it if you wanted to, but I think sometimes just having the flow of the machine and letting the ideas come out as you're sewing can create something quite interesting as well. Through the nature of textiles, it does consider layering, so applying different colours of stitches and textures and appliquing and I do a lot of printing as well within my work. So they're very multi-textural, which again falls into that kind of way of working that I like to do, which is the sort of textural element that I was talking about earlier. So I think machine embroidery is the one that I like to use the most because it is my paintbrush in a way. But I do like the hand applied processes as well, and how I can capture the feeling that I want to have within the pieces. So for example, say there's particular areas of the artwork that I'd like the eye to be drawn to, I would maybe go in with some hand applied processes, and that could look like beading, it could look like hand applied applique and hand embroidery as well. So it really depends on what I'm doing, but I think the main way of creating is kind of getting the imagery and the textures that I want to create and putting them together and layering, and that's how it kind of forms, and then being really reactive in the way it's building and thinking, okay, I quite like this bit, maybe that needs something there. I don't really have an image I'm aiming for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I was just about to ask actually, do you start with a design, and if so, do you then stick to it, or does your work just evolve organically as you're working on it?
I'd say a bit of both, really. So I always like to start with a sketchbook. I think they're a really nice way of kind of getting all your thoughts out. So I do drawing and painting, collaging, and just trying to kind of record things that I'm seeing or learning about. So I use my sketchbooks almost like a mini archive for me to dip in and out of. And it allows me also to process, what it is that I'm exploring. So for example, if it is archival records or there's things I've seen in nature, it's a way that I can just pop them all in there, get all my thoughts out, and then I can go back and, review it in my own time. But because I've created that imagery, it feels quite unique to me and authentic to me. And through the process of recording, there might be certain things in there that I quite like. So maybe I like the painterly quality of some of the imagery that I've done, or the way I've layered text, for example. Or it could be the way that I've put the page together. It could be the composition that I quite like. So even just that simple way of creating just your ideas and putting them down somewhere can be a source of inspiration. And then from there, I tend to kind of pick out some key things that I'm interested in, and I'll start to print make and get that onto some fabric. Or it could be that I start with some textile illustrations, and then the pieces all begin to layer from there. So I do have an idea, and sometimes I do know what I want a piece to be about, but at the same time, it's not a vision that I think, well, I had that piece there and I had that bit there. I'm not putting a jigsaw back together. I'm just placing the pieces down in a way that feels right, and it's quite instinctual, if that makes sense.
Because you're obviously working on quite a number of layers, aren't you? You've got, I presume that you're putting your background in first, then you're adding extra details and pieces on top. So there's a lot of layering and a lot of different elements that are going into your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, they can vary. So some pieces have got photographs that I've taken. So say I've been on a walk and I've seen things and I've photographed stuff as I go around. Maybe some of them images are then put onto the textiles, but other pieces are hand painted. And then I like to make my own embellishments. So, maybe I want to create a bit of depth or a bit of a 3D aspect to the textiles. So how I do that is, again, making them elements. So it is very layered. So it could be that the first layer, the printed part and the imagery, is very flat, but because of the colours and the mark making I use, or if it is a photograph, you have got some sort of depth there. And then from that, I start to build on top of it. So I think it depends on what I'm using and how I'd like the piece to go. But yeah, it is very much about layering and being very intuitive and reactive to it as I build the pieces.
And do you have somewhere that you keep all of the different bits and pieces that you might eventually use? I just have this mental impression of you having a wonderful workshop space where you have all these different elements that you could possibly need to put onto your final textile piece.
Yeah, I think if anybody does textiles, they might be able to relate with me here, because you end up hoarding things.
Oh,
You see
yeah.
potential in everything. So I think, I do. I tend to just, if I'm going to start making making some work, I tend to just, like I say, start the sketchbook and then create lots of fabrics or textures or, elements that I feel that could work quite nicely with what I want to do. And then I use that as like a bank of resources, so I can use them fabrics, or maybe I've collected things. I quite like using lace within my work. For example, one of the things I do is I make my own sketchbook. So them pieces are very much, taking lots of different elements and things that I've collected or ideas that I've had that I've translated into textiles and applying them all within there. So I think, yeah, it can be a bit of a problem sometimes because you do collect stuff. But I think, I think, again, not all that to do with your creative instincts. I think, like I always say to people, everyone's got this inbuilt colour palette, or you're drawn to certain things because that is your creative flair. Just, subtly underneath everything, that's your creative flair there, because you're picking these elements up for a reason. If it weren't right, you wouldn't have picked it. So I think, having bits that that you like to use, and just storing a few samples that maybe you're not using right now, but you could later, like chop them up and put them into some other pieces that it works for, is a good way to kind of get the ball rolling. And that's how I tend to work. Sometimes it is that I make everything for a piece. So I think, again, I don't really have a set rule around it. It is very like my workshops, no rules. I just let the creativity come out. It depends, like if I am working obviously for a commission, or I'm working for a project, it's very different. I'm a bit more tailored in the way that I create. I don't give myself as much as a free rein, because sometimes it's quite hard to bring it back in. If you go too wide out, that's sometimes hard. So do kind of, be a bit more restrictive in them areas occasionally. But I think it is really important to let yourself just have the freedom, because I find personally within my own work, that's where I actually discover stuff. And that's where I kind of think, oh, well, I didn't think maybe my work would look like this. Is this going somewhere? I like how that bit looks, so I might try and do this. And they kind of inspire each other, if that makes sense.
One of the things that looking at your work, I'm not really aware of any sense of how large they are. I mean, can you tell me how large they are? Do you work quite big, or?
Yeah, it really ranges. So, like, latest body of work that I've been working on, and I'm still developing, ranges from a very small sample, so kind of imagine an A5 size, to a big canvas that's 1 metre by 1 metre. So they can be really different in sizes. And I think sometimes working at different scales produce different things, because obviously on a larger scale, you've got a lot more space to fill, and working bigger as well, the way the stitch looks and how maybe you apply it will all change. So I think you can get different outcomes by just the scale that you work on. But as a sort of a dumb rule, the majority of my work is kind of mid-size. So it could be maybe like 1/2 metre by 1/2 metre or smaller. But that again varies. And I think because of my love of sketchbooks and the way that they've been so predominant within the whole of my creativity, that's something where I like to build and start. So it might just be that they stop there, and that's the piece, if that makes sense. I don't always feel the need to go outside of that. The sketchbook is enough on its own. So I don't really have a kind of, this is the size that I make. It really just depends. And again, it's all very intuitive.
Because I suppose that you probably have certain things that you do every time. So do you work on a particular background? Because obviously some of the things that you're putting on, because you're putting a lot of things on, will need quite a bit of support. So I wonder, do you work with a particularly strong background when you're adding your machine embroidery and everything to it?
Yeah, I think because it's so heavily stitched, you need something, like you say, to hold that. But because the first initial stage is of creating the artwork is kind of collaging elements together, I think straight away that does give it a bit of strength. But one thing I like to do is add some sort of interfacing on the back. So that's like, imagine a house, like that's my foundation, it's the very bottom of the work. And then the first layer is kind of getting the, textures, the imagery, the collage, the printmaking, then I build on top of that with another layer, which is like all the stitch are appliqued elements, and then it could be built on again with the hand applied processes or even more stitched elements. So I think depending on what techniques I'm using can vary, but it kind of follows that structure, and it needs that kind of base layer, the interfacing, to kind of hold it all together. I'm not too precise. I like some loose threads. I like it to have that real textural quality. If it kind of warps in areas, I personally quite like that. So I'm not too precious, and I don't mind if it takes its own a little bit. And it's a shape as well, I don't always work to a square. Sometimes I work within hoops, or I create my own canvas background, but it's not a canvas, but I make my own background with textiles and kind of that heavier weight base in a shape that I want to use. So I think it does vary, but you do need something to kind of hold it all together, because like you say, if you have heavy stitching so much or applying so much, if it's too thin, it won't give you the impact, and it won't be able to hold its own.
Yeah. And do you paint and draw directly onto your piece, or is that something that you save for the pieces that you would apply?
Sometimes I do, again, depending on the techniques that I've chosen to use for that piece. The printing techniques that I use actually allow me to paint, so things like painting on a screen or kind of transferring techniques where I can actually almost translate elements out of the sketchbook onto fabric, which is a nice way of working. Sometimes I do printmaking techniques like monoprinting, which allows you to translate the drawing elements and texture that way. But then, like you say, some of them pieces could be pre-made and then built back into the textiles. So whether that's through machine embroidery or like appliquing that back in. And like I say, I like to make a lot of my own embellishments. So kind of taking them elements and making them into an embellishment. So the kind of thing I'm using my techniques and the things that I like to do, building all the elements that, I want to kind of create. They're inspired by my sketchbook, but then how I put that back together could differ every time. One of the things that I've done recently in the Hidden Worlds body of work is I've kind of thought about the interactive element within that as well. So, for example, in nature, things like biofluorescence, which is basically UV light is something that humans can't see, but animals and insects can. And this whole world exists in front of us right now that we just can't see, which it blew my mind. And, like things like the starling birds, we see them quite brown and like blacky looking, but actually they see each other vibrant and these different colours because of the UV elements within them. So I did a lot of research into these things, and I loved that this whole hidden world existed that we just can't see. And it gave me that idea of just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I thought, how can I get this into my textiles? So I started to explore like different UV reactive pigments and threads and materials. And so that when you look at my work, it just looks like textile artwork. But when you shine a UV torch on it, it reveals this hidden element of the work, and it lights up and it's reactive to the UV light, or if it's in the dark, it might glow. So I think thinking outside the box a little bit has also inspired how I create as well. It stopped it feeling like just at surface level. It's about capturing these deeper aspects. And I think that's something I'd like to keep exploring moving forward as well.
You're obviously putting a lot of thought and a lot of yourself into the pieces. And I wonder how important it is to you that the people that are viewing the pieces understand the meaning behind your work.
Yeah, I do think it is important. I like people to interpret it because I kind of draw that back to kind of nature and folklore. It belongs to everybody. It's a part of everybody. Everybody can relate to it in some way. And it's been passed down through so many generations and communities in terms of the storytelling, and also like our love of nature as well. So I think, visually straight away people look at it and they're kind of interpreting it in that way and relating to it in a way that they can, because it's something that they recognise. But I like to give people a bit of the storytelling behind it, and, you know, especially about the hidden worlds and this new perspective, because I like to view my artwork almost like a portal. So there's like our world, nature, and the other world, which is kind of what's believed in folklore to be the place where these mythical creatures and supernatural beings are from. And a lot of folklore stories talk about kind of these creatures and nature. They're very intertwined. And when I think back about it, it not only taught people and us about the world around us, it gave us appreciation and taught us to respect it as well. And, you know, we're doing research into these areas. People kind of talk about folklore being like an innate human ability to storytell. It kind of connects to that, because if you think when it was the most prevalent, there was no emergency services, there was no scientific research. And as humans, we need to know and we need to understand. So these stories are kind of teaching us about, you know, the world, and making us notice nature and appreciate nature. And sometimes they're quite dark, these folklore stories. And I think it gives explanation for things that maybe we couldn't put an explanation to. So with that in mind, and kind of looking at the natural world and all these hidden elements that we're only just really starting to discover, I think that point and sharing that with people then gives them a new view of my work and also of the world around us. And using the UV torch and revealing this hidden element of the textiles, I think that's the bit where I feel it's really important people see that and understand that, because then it gives me my goal. And my goal is to give people that new perspective of the world around us, and especially adults, like I was saying before, to kind of slow down and notice, because it's so good for our well-being as well.
When you're taking workshops and things, are people mainly working by hand, or are they working with a sewing machine? How does that element, is that something that comes over in the class, that people are able to do free machine embroidery, or is that just too much for a short class?
It's something that I do and I want to do more of. It's something where I'm developing more courses and workshops in that area. Again, it's very mixed media textiles. So some of the workshops are kind of an introductory, you know, step into the world of textiles, using materials in a fun and creative way to create outcomes. Because a lot of people tend to want to go home with something and feel like they've made something, I find. So I have workshops that focus on that, but there's also the ones that are kind of exploring the creative process. And like I was mentioning before, like unlocking your imagination and allowing you to slow down and allowing you to notice. And I think sometimes, especially with kind of hand applied processes, just the repetition and nature of creating that way all feeds into that as well. It brings people into the moment and encourages people to slow down. So I think using different techniques and printmaking, all these different elements that I do, and feeding it into a way that people feel is accessible, but also unlocks that part of themselves and gives them a taste of, you know, what could I do with this, is really the goal. But like I say, I do offer machine embroidery masterclasses and approaches into the way I create as well. It's something that I'm building even more on, and I'd love to share with people, because it is a real passion of mine, and I love for people to kind of find theirs as well.
Because sometimes machines can be, let's say, challenging.
Absolutely.
So you can actually end up feeling more fraught by the time you've undergone battle with one.
Yeah, it is true.
I mean, I don't know, do you have a particular type of machine that you use, that you enjoy using?
I just have a regular sewing machine. So I have a Bernina. It's nothing fancy, and I only actually use two of the stitches on it. I only use a straight stitch and a zigzag. I think you can get all these wonderful machines that do so many different things, which is amazing. But sometimes I feel that using less is more, if that makes sense, even though I'm a maximalist in the nature of create my work. But actually being a bit restrictive in terms of what stitches you're using encourages your imagination a bit more, encourages you to think creatively about how you could capture those textures and how you could draw, or how you could build colour or imagery within what you're doing. And I think because I've, you know, through the years had this machine and used it in different ways, it's allowed me to kind of build my own style of embroidery. And, you know, over time that's developed. So I think sometimes not not having so many settings or just using the simple stitches and really going in with what you can do with them can offer so much more to your work. And then if you want to build in, specialist stitches or the pre-programmed stitches or some amazing machines, you can actually put a USB in and upload your own variations, which is, fab. You could try all that, but I think when you just start off simple, sometimes, like I say, it really helps you build your own way of creating and how you could capture the imagery in a way that feels authentic to you. And that's something I tend to share because I do machine embroidery masterclasses where it is kind of an introduction to the sewing machine and how to use it. But I start to kind of break down a few simple steps and ways in how I actually have got to the point where I use stitching this way and, really demystify it. Because like you say, I think the machine can be quite scary for people. And I definitely had a love-hate relationship with it. But just don't be afraid of it. I think just keep practicing and trying stuff. I mean, the amount of things in the past that I've, put through a sewing machine, I remember dipping paper into wax to create interesting textures and then putting that through the machine. And when I think back now, that's awful, isn't it? Because I just was breaking all the machines. But I think sometimes, not being too precious about things and just trying and being experimental is where you really get hold of it and find, how to use it in a creative way. And also it gets your confidence built up and your knowledge and how to actually do it as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes people get quite hung up, don't they, on all the different functions a sewing machine can have. But actually, in that context, all you're really wanting for it to do is to be really forgiving, because you need it to just carry on going, despite what you put underneath it, because obviously you can be sewing quite a few layers, can't you? So you need it to go through all of those layers. So in that case, I suppose what you really need is a sort of workhorse of a machine, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, on the whole, most machines can do it. Obviously, if you've got really heavy weight fabric or you've got a very dense textile artwork, of course, you might need a machine that is a bit more heavy duty. But I think overall, even your most basic machine, if you can drop the dog feed and you can get a machine embroidery foot with it or buy one, then you're away. I think that's where I started, and just playing and, your first ever textile sample, it might be, but it's never going to be your best one. You're going to start somewhere and keep developing. And like I was kind of saying before, I don't really feel like it's always going to be a working document, and that's just being creative. Even now, through all the years I've been developing my practice and, the lovely opportunities that I've had to kind of put my artwork out there, I still feel like there's so much more I could do. And I still feel like what if, and keep developing, and could this change? But that is just being a creative. I don't think you're ever going to reach that end point. I think if you do reach that end point, that's where you can kind of get a bit stuck and, your ideas sort of dry up. So I think it is important just to have not too much pressure on yourself and just try and have fun and ask yourself what if, and don't throw everything in the bin. I used to teach when I've taught at colleges and everything, and the amount of times I've had to save work from going in the bin because I think people feel if it doesn't look a certain way straight away, then they're not good enough, and it isn't right. But actually, when you just keep these elements and you move forward, you can actually look back and appreciate it, and you might even see things in them that you didn't before. And sometimes stepping away can be really helpful. And even now, when I do stuff, you can just look at your work that much that you stop seeing it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I always say to my students, sort of walk away for a little bit, because you do get to concentrate on what's probably quite a small area, because you've been working on that area maybe for all day, and it doesn't look right and you can't figure out why. Sometimes you leave it in place or pinned up or propped up somewhere for 24 hours. You go back and you think, well, what did I think was wrong with it?
Absolutely, yeah. It's so true. And I think sometimes it's that having that creative pause, I like to call it, it lets ideas sort of percolate in your mind, and, coming away from it and going back, it does give you a new perspective, or it might fuel new ideas, because there is a risk of just keep pushing through with it and forcing it, and you just overwork something, or you start doing something, you think, oh, why have I done that? I've ruined it, because you're forcing it out of you, rather than thinking, okay, I'm feeling like I'm hitting a bit of a wall here, or I'm getting to a point where I'm not really sure where this is going. It, like you say, just giving it a bit of time and space and then coming back to it can be like amazing, like what it can do. And it gives you a new perspective, like you say, on your own work as well. I think sometimes like having things like a sketchbook or a mood board or a collection of samples, whatever it might be, to hand also can allow you, if you lay everything out, to see things in a bigger picture. I think sometimes, like you say, you become very zoomed in on little areas or things that you're making and you stop seeing it as a whole. And by looking at it as a whole as well, you can maybe take bits from different places and think, actually, if I did more of that there and took a bit of that from that one, it's going to achieve what I want to achieve. So it is super beneficial, and it is all part of the creative process as well. You know, I say like breaking it down and putting it back together in a way that feels right for you.
Yeah, I mean, I always think about, or particularly machine embroidery, but I suppose all embroidery really, a little bit like oil painting. You know, you sort of do some oil painting. If it doesn't quite work, you just paint over it.
Yeah.
You know, oh, that bit wasn't quite right. Well, I'll just machine over that bit, or I'll stick something over it. But it is very open to adjustment as you go along, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've got to be a bit, you know, have the space for things going wrong. You allow mistakes to happen, because it will. You know, I'll give you a funny story. It's something I tend to tell a lot of my students. But when I made like a massive 2 meter by 1 meter piece of artwork that was all corals, I was looking at underneath the sea, and I painted and drawn these corals and printed them onto fabric, and then each one I was embroidering into by hand, and I did embellishment, and then at the end they were all being put together for a large piece. And I just remember like sitting for about 2 hours, I think it was, embroidering into this coral, and I was really pleased with how it was looking. And then when I stood up, I'd stitched the whole thing to my trousers, and I just like, oh my gosh. But I think, you know, I don't even know how I didn't feel it, to be honest. But, you know, stuff will happen, and it was rectified. I just had to cut my trousers out and
I
unpick
was
it
just
off the
going to
back.
say, which did you sacrifice, your trousers or the piece?
Well, it had to be the trousers. And I just like unpicked them off the back. But, you know, even then I was just like, yeah, you know, these things happen, and it is about adapting. The whole point of being creative is kind of problem solving. You're coming up with ideas and then thinking, okay, how do I put that together, and how do I put this together? And things will crop up, or maybe don't turn out the way that you thought they would. And then you've got to kind of problem solve and find new ways around it. And I think, you know, kind of looking at the bigger concept of that, that's why a lot of employers are now looking for this creative thinking aspect, because it's a skill at the end of the day. I think people just kind of play it down as, oh, well, it's just being creative, but actually it's a life skill. And I think using it and thinking about it that way, I think just puts everything into reality a little bit. You know, you stop panicking as much, and you think, okay, well, I've come up with these ideas, I can think of something else I can do for this. Or thinking, actually, no, I'm just going to leave that now and I'm going to move on to something else. And with that mentality, it allows you to grow, and it allows you to kind of develop and keep, you know, moving forward in that way.
I wonder, do you, I think the answer to this might be no, listening to your enthusiasm, but I'm going to ask anyway. Do you ever experience a creative block? And I wonder, you know, if you do, how do you get out of those moments? Or perhaps if you don't personally, how do you suggest your students would?
Well, I absolutely do, yeah. There's been times where, you know, you create, and you think, oh, this is looking all great. And then you get to a point and you think, I don't know. And like all of these things I'm saying is from experience, because I think, you know, you're going to hit a block. You are going to hit that wall sometimes. But I think like you're saying, like coming away or revisiting things or stripping it back can really help with your creative block, and maybe not forcing it as well. You know, it's not a switch you can just turn on. I feel you can be creative and have fun and it just be light-hearted without it having the pressure of becoming something. And sometimes they're the best ways to kind of create, because you don't feel that pressure, and it doesn't block any of your creativity. You're just letting yourself to be creative and play and intuitive in the process. So I think sometimes that's a really good place to go to if you are experiencing any creative block, or if even that feels too much, just sort of stepping away and just jotting a few things in a notebook, stuff that crops up or comes to mind or anything that inspires you. It's very low pressure, but you are still recording in a way that you could return to that and that could translate into something visual. So yeah, I have definitely experienced creative block, and I think because being creative is a part of you, you're not going to have every day that's going to be a best creative day, just like every day is going to be your best day, but I think it will pass and you can get over it. So yeah, I definitely have experienced it.
So I wonder, what do your days look like? I mean, do you have your own studio area? Do you go to work, so to speak, or is it less regimented than that?
Yes, I do have a little garden studio. I'm very lucky to have it, where I come and do all my work. And, people say, oh, but it's wonderful. I bet you stitch every day on the sewing machine. Actually, in reality, it doesn't really look like that, because although being creative is a huge part of being an artist, like I mentioned before, you are running a business. So, that's getting in touch with people, that's, booking workshops in or planning them things, or, it could be that you're working on a project and you've got stuff to do for that. There's the whole marketing side of things as well, how you can reach other audiences. And I think the list goes on. So although I am creative and although I am doing my own work and practice, there's lots of other elements that you kind of have to do being an artist. And if you want to kind of basically do it as a job, whether that's, you might have your own product line, for instance, and sell that. You're manning a shop, you're ordering stock, you're designing and keeping up with printing demands or whatever it might be. It isn't just, sat there lovely stitching us away, even though that would be the ideal job. I think everybody would love to do that.
I think often people do have that idealised view of you sitting in front of a roaring fire every day with, your embroidery on your lap, and as you say, when you do it as a business, you're going to have all of those mundane tasks, to do, like keeping up the website. Social media now takes quite a lot of time, reaching out to people, boring things like accounts. There's just so many things, isn't there? Well, you said that with feeling.
That's it. And then when you sign up to be an artist, you don't really sign up to all the other jobs that you have to do, like being in a finance department and the marketing department, all these things that, because you do tend to be like a one-man band most of the time if you're an independent artist, so yeah, you are a business owner at the end of the day, especially if you kind of do the sort of thing I've gone down the route of doing. But, a portfolio career can be work and jobs as well. So like I say, I've got quite a large amount of experience of teaching, but I've always kept my creative practice going alongside it. So in the past, I've taught from secondary school all the way up to university level, and then community art projects as well. And so, because I'm very passionate about sharing creativity with other people and people finding their own. So that's something that I've always kept alongside doing my creative work. But now I tend to do more community-based stuff. So even though you are creative in your own right and you create your own work, it doesn't just stop there. It's all these different little strands that come off that build up you as an artist and what your job is, basically, which I don't think, like you're saying before, a lot of people really envision when they think of an artist. They think of this, lovely life sitting, like you say, in front of a fire and stitching away. And actually, in the reality, it's not really like that as much. At times it can be, but on the whole, you are many hats. Or you wear many hats, should I say.
You do indeed, yes. Because ultimately you've got to be able to sell things, haven't you? Otherwise you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And even things like going out to a workshop, I don't think people often take on board just how much preparation goes into, making sure you've got everything to do the workshop, all the samples, all the bits that your students will need. They're all packed up. Maybe you have to make kits up. I don't know, but you've got to get yourself there, haven't you? Get it all in the back of the car, get yourself there. Even that, there's quite a lot too, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely is. I feel like I'm a permanent bag lady. I've got like 100 bags with me all the time. But yeah, it is. And, I think like even to the point of planning out the session, what you're going to do where, how will you explain that to somebody in a way that they understand, because you're not going to go into a room with everybody on the same level. There might be people there who've never ever touched a needle and thread before, and there might be people there that do it as a very serious hobby, for instance. So I think you've got to be prepared and, think about that. And also you've got, like you say, the planning of it all, the preparation of getting everything ready, ordering all the materials, packing everything up, make sure you've got everything. And then actually on the day, manning the space and making it sure everybody feels comfortable and that health and safety is there as well. Because if they're using machines, for example, you've got to think of that. So there are lots of things to think about. I think personally with my own like teaching experience, I can draw on that quite a lot, which does help. But yeah, it is a big operation. And then when you do come back, it's the unpacking job, which for some reason I always have to reorganize my cupboard every time.
Yeah, I hate that because the temptation is just to throw it all in and then you can't find any of it the next time.
Oh no, it's true. I think being out and chatting to people and sharing skills in person, and I'm starting doing a lot more online things as well. So like a seasonal stitch circle where people can join from wherever and just take a moment, a creative pause in the day to be creative. I think just having that connection with people is a really lovely part of what I do, because not only is it kind of feeding into things I'm really passionate about and I want to do and help people with, but also it is just you. Like 90% of the time it's just quite isolating sometimes being an artist. So getting out and talking to people and collaborating with people, not every day looks the same, and I think that's a really lovely part of the job and a really exciting part of the job, because it isn't like a 9 to 5. Sometimes it's a bit more, but what I mean by that is you're out and doing lots of different opportunities and workshops and meeting loads of different people, which is really a really, really nice part of the job.
It is. I mean, have you got things that are coming up for you that you're excited to do? Any books or exhibitions or anything like that you could tell us about?
Yeah, so I've been building quite a few things in the pipeline, which I'm going to be sharing more about. But one of them things is, like I was saying, kind of doing more courses and online things like workshops and stuff like that I'm going to be putting even more out very soon. Also, like in-person events as well. Like I do a lot of workshops. I've just exhibited at the Textile Festival in Manchester, which was a lovely experience. I had all my work there and chatting to people. So I want to be doing some more things like that, hopefully coming up. But yeah, just lots of different things, trying to do more community arts projects as well, because that's something that I'm really passionate about. But I do always say to people, if you'd like to sign up to my newsletter, that's the best place to be, because that's where I kind of share insights, but also upcoming things that people can get involved with as well. And if they'd like to learn more about my practice, or, this whole idea of unlocking your imagination and things that I'm really passionate about, I love to share there as well.
Well, we'll make sure that we put a link to that in our notes for the episode as well.
Oh, thank you.
So, Murron, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Oh, thank you, Gail.
I wish you all the very best for the future.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely being on the podcast and chatting to you today.